Hello and welcome to the Week 15 slash Heisman video. Since Week 15 is literally just the Army-Navy game, I'm going to do my prediction for it, and then I'm going to jump right into Heisman talks. I'm going to highlight who I have as my top favorites in reverse order, and I'm going to go over their seasons individually. So, looking at this game, we got Army versus Navy. Now, Navy's owned it recently, but Army won it last year. And honestly, I gotta tell you, Army is looking a lot better this year than Navy is. I'm gonna go with Army winning their second in a row. So, I think the tables have sort of turned on Navy right now, and that Army is pulling itself a little better. It's gonna be a close game. I'm thinking like 28-24, somewhere around there. But I got Army winning. So, that's it for Week 15 predictions. Put that out of the way. Alright, so now we got to jump right in. And I'm going to start with the person I think has the weakest argument. And it's going to be Jonathan Taylor for Wisconsin. He's in my last spot. I have, I believe, 6 players on my list. He would be in 6th. He had a pretty good start to the season. Finishes with 1,847 rushing yards and 13 rushing touchdowns, as well as 82 receiving yards. Total yardage of 1,929. He's had a good season, but he's also played a bunch of no one. So, and the one game they had against a true, rough opponent, like Ohio State in the conference championship, he had 41 yards rushing and only 30 yards receiving. No touchdowns. So, I honestly can't tell you that I think he's up in the top 5. Alright, so, first on my list of, because I believe it's the top 5 who get invited. So, first on my list who would be invited, Saquon Barkley. I had him first early in the season. He's kind of fallen off at the end. Had that lull right towards the end of the season. But I think the true depth of his work makes it a lot better. His final stats. He had 1,134 rushing yards with 16 rushing touchdowns. 594 receiving yards with 3 receiving touchdowns, 426 kick return yards with 2 kick return touchdowns. That puts him at 2,154 all-purpose yardage and 21 total touchdowns. I think that's an explosive season, and I think it's more than enough to earn him a visit to the final naming and whatnot. Number 4 on my list. Going in reverse order, so that was 6, 5, now 4. Mason Rudolph. Despite falling apart at the end of the season, I still think Oklahoma State's Mason Rudolph deserves a trip out, at the very least. I mean, he had an explosive season. He had 4,553 passing yards with 35 passing touchdowns and only 9 interceptions. He had only 29 rushing yards, but 10 rushing touchdowns. His final total yardage was 4,582 yards with 45 total touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Those numbers are stellar, and that's through 12 games. So, that should put a lot in perspective. He did really well. However, he comes in 4th here because in key games, while he did throw touchdowns and did throw for a lot of yards, he also threw most of his interceptions in those big games. For example, he had the loss, I believe that was the Oklahoma loss, where he threw 448 yards, 5 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions. And then in that late loss after that, 425 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Their other loss in the season, 398 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So in those 3 losses, he threw 6 of his 9 interceptions. So that's what kind of holds him back, in my opinion. Alright. Number 3 on my list. Stanford's Bryce Love. Now, Bryce Love had an explosive start. Only low moment was when he missed that one game, Game 8 of the season. He came back still injured in Game 9. That was his only game, Game 9, where he did not have 100 yards rushing or more. The dude was insanely good for Stanford. And even in the losses, he did well. Now, that one loss where he did the one game he was under 100, he had 69 yards and a touchdown, and they lost the game still. But I mean, listen to these losses. 160 yards and a touchdown, loss. That was the one to USC in the beginning of the season. 184 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 reception for 3 yards in the loss immediately following that one. And then the last one against USC again, 125 yards and a touchdown. So he had great stats in his losses. His final season stats were 1,973 yards rushing, 17 rushing touchdowns, and 33 receiving yards. So he's a total yardage of 2,006 yards and 17 total touchdowns. That's a pretty good spot to be sitting. I mean, he's doing really well, and he could easily win it. Now, that's the thing I want to throw out here. My top 3 are players I think could win it. I'm ordering them in the order I think I would pick it right now, but any of them could win it. So, number 2. Number 2 was the hardest part for me. Was ordering these last ones, because number 2 is Lamar Jackson. You guys know me. I've been wanting him to win the Heisman since the season started, and he's done so well this season. It's not quite as good as last season, and they weren't winning, so it fell apart. Now, that being said, Lamar Jackson had stellar stats in almost all of his losses. The loss to Clemson, 317 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 1 interception, 64 yards rushing. In the loss later in the season, I forget who all the losses were, I didn't mark that down, but in their second loss on the season, he had 354 yards and a touchdown passing with an interception, 73 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns. The loss immediately following that, 332 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 180 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns rushing. And then the last loss they had in the season, he had 330 yards passing with a touchdown and an interception, and 161 yards rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns. He made up almost all of their offense on every single one of those losses. They made it the Lamar Jackson show, and they couldn't win in spite of it. So, his final season stats, though, 3,489 passing yards, 25 passing touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. 1,443 rushing yards, 17 rushing touchdowns. That puts him at a total yardage of 4,932 yards with 42 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. His stats are stellar. Not quite as good as his stats from last season, but I still think they're Heisman worthy. But the person I think is going to win the Heisman, Baker Mayfield of Oklahoma. And honestly, it is about time for him. He's had how many times he's gone to the finalists and not won the award? I mean, it sucks, but hey. His one loss on the season, and he performed well in it. 306 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 57 rushing yards, and a touchdown. That's his second highest rushing total on the season. The highest being the conference championship against TCU. So, Baker Mayfield's performed in all of his. He has very few interceptions on the season. But let's see his final stats. His final stats are 4,346 passing yards, or 340 passing yards, sorry, not 6. 4,340 passing yards, 41 passing touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. 310 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. That puts him at a total yardage of 4,650 total yards, 46 total touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. I think Baker Mayfield, what he has meant to his team, and the background of his story, him walking on at Texas A&M, then transferring to Oklahoma and having to walk on there, and I just think that his background story and his fight to get to this point, they're going to the playoffs and he has the stats to back himself up. I think it's time Baker Mayfield won the Heisman. So let me know what you guys think. Who do you think's going to win the Heisman on Saturday? I told you who I think. I want to hear from you guys in the comments below. Also, if you like what I'm doing, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I will see you guys after the weekend.